Just another brother with another humble question. Just another brother with another humble question.
Welcome to A Brother with Questions. I am your host, B. Period. Thank y'all for joining me on the ride today. I appreciate y'all. Before we get going, man, let me not forget to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel, man. Hit the like button. You know, whoop, there it is right there. Hit the like button. Share, comment, man, what you think about the videos. Please, we appreciate everything you do to help us grow. Let's see. We are in Reaction Monday here. We're gonna take a look at Vivek Ramaswamy. He went back on the Breakfast Club the other day, and he had some. There was a clip that I saw where he was breaking down some history of the country, and found it really interesting, and just wanted to share some of my thoughts. But let's check this out. Now, where we're picking up though. Let me give you some context here. Where we're picking up, he is talking about his faith and how he thought one of his challenges running during the campaign was his faith and people not quite understanding his faith. So let's pick it up.
Question, and understandably on people's minds, right? The nation is founded, as a matter of history, on Judeo-Christian principles. But one of the things I had an opportunity to share with people was actually, and it almost forced me to take a step back and really locate, like, what are my actual faith convictions? Right? Most of us think we are whatever religion we are, but when you're really pressed on it, it's one of the things in this campaign is it really brought me back in touch with my own faith. And I shared with people what my faith is. There's one true God. He puts us here for a purpose. He works through us. It's not being done by us. It's being done through us. But we are still equal because God resides in each of us. That's the heart of my faith, which is slightly different than the way you'd say it is that we're equal because we're all made in the image of God and we're equal in the eyes of God, but it's making the same point. And I also learned a lot about the difference and how to talk about the difference between being a president and a pastor.
So like I said, right here, we open up with him sharing about his faith. And for me, he's a Hindu, if you did not know. But I never really was concerned about his religion. But what I found interesting about him is that his religion set part of the foundation for who he is. And so even though I identify as Christian, like I said, he's a Hindu, but I understood letting faith and letting God be your foundation for who you are and then how you react to the world. And so for me, it didn't matter to me that he wasn't Christian. It only mattered that he had a foundation in God, and that foundation led him from what he was. And so while I'm not an expert on Hinduism, I'm an expert on understanding that I have to submit to a greater power who's giving me an ability to do the things that I'm doing. And when I'm in the wrong of that, I have to be accountable for that. And so I can connect with that. Because let's be honest. Most politicians who identified their faith, you can't find their faith before they identified it. So for me, I don't really get caught up in what a politician's faith is as much anyway, because you can't find their faith until they run for a lot of politicians. Donald Trump is a great example of that. There's no evidence of what his faith was until it was time for him to identify his faith. And even in that, right? I'm the type of person who grew up in church, right? I grew up church 5, 6, 7 days a week sometimes. I grew up that, and now, we don't have church like that no more. Thank God. But I'm a person who, when the doors are open, I try and be there. And so when I look at most politicians, right, they don't do that. That's not who they are. That's not what they represent when it comes in terms of their Christianity. And I respect that. But because of that, I'm not going to judge you based on your faith, because I know that you're not trying, or let me not say I know. It would seem you're not pursuing God. Let's say that at the same level that I am. Let's keep going.
So you brought up Thomas Jefferson, and a lot of the left likes to cancel part of his legacy because he was a slaveholder. There's actually something coming from the other side that I saw as well, and I had a chance to educate people on and even refresh myself on.
What?
Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian, not a traditional Christian. He was a deist, actually. He made a part of the New Testament. He didn't like all the stuff about the miracles and everything else, but he liked the philosophy and the teachings of Jesus Christ. And so he took a razor blade and he cut out the parts of the New Testament that had the philosophy that he thought spoke to him. He used glue to glue them together. That constitutes the Jefferson Bible today. And so the interesting thing about that is I would meet a lot of people on the campaign trail who would be, frankly, disgusted. And I have to admit, part of me is also disgusted with the view that we can't respect Thomas Jefferson's legacy, the guy who at the age of 33 wrote the Declaration of Independence. I'm sitting in a swivel chair right now. This was invented by Thomas Jefferson, the man who was 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He invented the swivel chair right around the same time. That man, the unafraid, the guy on the Lewis and Clark expeditions, that we can't celebrate him today because he was a slaveholder. From that angle, to also tell a group of people who believes that only a Christian can be the U.S. president, who love Thomas Jefferson, who love the signer of the Declaration of Independence, who hate the left for saying that we can't celebrate Thomas Jefferson because he was a slaveholder, who actually believe that only a Christian can be president.
So if you're following, right, he's talking about the complexities of individuals. And so we got two people, one who loves Thomas Jefferson, one who hates Thomas Jefferson, right? Because a lot of people today say we shouldn't celebrate the founding fathers of America because they at the time supported slavery. And so as such, everything that they've done or have done or did do, I should say, should be discounted because they believed in slavery at the time. And then, as he was saying, there's others who celebrate Thomas Jefferson and want to believe in only supporting Christian presidents. And here was a president at the time who was not Christian. And so two people who hate Thomas Jefferson for reasons that I guess he's arguing don't add up to the complete person of who he was. And so, you know, I'll admit I've had some struggles in my past with this concept of celebrating the forefathers who were former slave owners. But one of the things that I've sort of been elevating to is understanding the complexities of humans and looking at people not from my perspective of, 2024, 2020, or the 20th century, but from the perspective of the individuals for who they were during their century, right? So we're talking 1700s. So who were people in the 1700s? What was considered normal in the 1700s? And what does it look like to buck the system in the 1700s? And so there's a perspective, and I'll get more into it. There's some other video I want to get to, but that's what we're talking about.
And yet Thomas Jefferson wasn't a traditional Christian.
Are you saying it's
at
okay,
the time he became the president?
It's okay that he was a slaveholder because he created the swivel chair?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that we are imperfect.
Charlemagne is so silly. But this is what he does, of course. It's okay for Thomas Jefferson to be a slaveholder because he made a swivel chair. It was clearly not the man's conversation, Charlemagne. That is very, very obvious. Notice how envy hasn't said anything.
Perfect human beings.
Yes, that's true.
You know what? 250 years from now, somebody will look at something that each of the three of us have done and criticize that 250 years from now and say, can you believe these people?
Shit, they doing it now.
No, but they're really good. If they're doing it now, and they were doing it for him then too. But if they're doing it now, they're really going to do it 250 years from now. And right now, if we really thought about it and we took a few hours or a few days to reflect on it, we could probably figure out what that is. But if you ask you on the spot right now, no, I don't think you could tell me on the spot right now what people 250 years from now are going to come here and tell you that you were an immoral man for, and all the other truths that you spoke, that we should reject them because you did some small thing that the people 250 years from now disagree with.
Well, being a slave
So I love how he just said that. So you did something, which, regardless of what you think of America, the foundation of America is still the U.S. Constitution, which the principles were set in place by Thomas Jefferson and others, back in 1700. And still, so all these years later, we're still using that as the foundation. And so whether you like the Constitution, you hate the Constitution, it's still who we are as a country. And some goals, right? We're trying to strive to achieve the humanity. Some people argue there's no humanity from people who own slaves, but we're still trying to achieve the theoretical goal of the Constitution, which was set forth by, yes, people who were extremely, or by today's standards, certainly extremely flawed at the time. And so you saw, Vivek said a small thing, and Charlemagne is about to argue that slavery was not a small thing. But again, we have to put it in perspective for the individuals who lived at that time. We're living in the 1700s. We're not living in 2022. It wasn't 1998 when we created the Constitution. It was 1700s. And so for these people, the idea of owning slaves, while a huge deal for us, it was a part of culture for them. And that's just the truth. It was a part of their culture that I would own individuals who would have to do what I wanted them to do. It was the culture. And we know that because we know that they weren't taken, they were bought. I don't know what the price was. I don't know if it was a fair price at the time. I don't know if they got ripped off in the price at the time. I don't know. But we do know they were bought. They weren't dragged by white people out of their homes anyway, or the country, or wherever we assume they came from. They were dragged, true, but they were dragged by the Africans who were conquering lands and then selling the ones that they did not want to other people. That's the history. It was the culture.
One of the small things, but I know you got to go through.
But back then it was actually, and that's the thing. In 1776,
it was the nature. It was the nature of the beast.
And so right now, don't be the person who was the slaveholder back then. Be John Adams. That's what we should call ourselves to be. The person who bucks the trend of their time to say, I'm going to speak on my own conviction and do what's different than being the product of my own time. Because anybody can parrot what the slogan is of their day. But the hard thing to do is to say the pack is running this way and I'm going this way instead anyway, because it's grounded on my conviction.
People like John
That's
Adams,
what we need.
People like John Adams are the reason you can point at it and say it was wrong, though, because John Adams knew it was wrong.
Well, a lot of people are going to be doing things today that are different than the way that each of us is going to be living our lives, and say the same thing in 250 years from now, somebody else.
And he's right. There were a lot of people who disagree with those ideas. But at the same time, it's no different than the disagreements of today. The moment you speak against what the popular culture says is what we should be doing, right? What do you become in today's society? You become shunned. You become blackballed, depending on who you are, right? You lose projects. You lose your income. You lose, which eventually is a trickle-down effect, right? If I lose my income, then it's only a matter of time before I probably lose the things that I am paying for, the mortgage on my house, the car that I drive, right? And so if that's what we're doing to people today, do you not think that they were doing the same type of thing to people in the 1700s who spoke up, which made it more difficult to speak up? And then it become, you think about today we live in a global society. And so, yes, if I lose something here, there's an opportunity for me to move potentially to another place and kind of keep going. But it was the 1700s. If you got on a boat to go to the next land, first of all, you're talking 3-4 months of a trip. And then you're hoping that the boat made it those 3 to 4 months. And then when you got there, what were you going to? So if you're living in this country and the popular opinion says one thing, when you begin to buck the system, if you were not already a self-made man, what were you looking for? And how many people are willing to buck that system when you know you're going to lose everything? It's 2024. How many people are willing to buck the system in 2024 when they know they're going to lose everything? Come on, man. We're people. We understand people. People haven't changed from the 1700s to 2024. We're still the same people. We're still the same people who are afraid to buck the trend because we know what that looks like when they shun you. We're still the same people who are more likely to stay in your lane because if I'm doing well in my lane, I don't want to leave it because I don't know what it looks like on the other side. We're still those same people. And so, there's got to be some grace. The same grace that we get from God for those people who we didn't speak to, we didn't understand, and we truly don't know who they are. We just know what their actions were.
People like Abe Lincoln thought it was wrong, clearly.
Abe Lincoln wasn't around then, man. That was still
later on.
That was still later on. And we'll just take the story down. We'll just pass this lineage down. We don't talk American history enough. Actually, it irritates me. A lot of conservatives talk about the importance of knowing history without actually just talking about history. Let's talk this through. So John Adams, you know who his son is? John Quincy Adams. He's the first non-founding father who became a president. Here's a funny fact about him. He was the first, so outside of the founding fathers, he was the first one who was elected president. He actually wasn't a great president. He was elected out after one term. People didn't love him. And so he tried to find everything else he could do. He went and tried to write some books, and he went and tried to start some nonprofits, and none of that spoke to him. He's the only president, John Adams' son, who went back to Congress after being a president. So he's elected to multiple terms of Congress. And you know what he went back to Congress with? Was one thing he regretted not doing as a president, was abolishing slavery. This is long before Abraham Lincoln comes along, okay? So he wanted to abolish slavery. His father was an abolitionist. He didn't accomplish much during his tenure as president. He was a good Secretary of State, but he was not a very good president. Think about the humility to say, I'm not even going to go to the Senate. I'm going to go become a congressman and get reelected multiple times with the mission of abolishing slavery. Now, here's what happens. There was a rule that Congress passes. It's called the...
Now he's going to finish the story, and I'm going to let him. But I pause to say, so here's one guy who we can account for who didn't quite believe in the traditions of his time. And so that's one man. How many others agreed with him, and how many others were bold enough to speak out? Because we know it existed, but now you got to be bold enough to speak out. And he's going to finish the story what happened to John Adams as a result of his boldness.
Gag rule, which stopped people from using the word slavery. Like they literally couldn't use the word slavery because they didn't want people to utter the word because it made them uncomfortable. So this guy's already been the U.S. president. Okay, so he has nothing to lose. He's just a congressman now. He says, I'm going to say the word. I'm going to say it, slavery. Slavery, slavery, slavery. There, Congress has set the rule that you can't say the word slavery. Well, I'm going to say it. So they censure him and have, just like they have today for George Santos or whatever, they'll have the equivalent of kicking him out of Congress. So they have his trial in Congress. And he uses his own personal trial, because this guy's got nothing to lose. They use his own personal trial for saying the word slavery when you're not allowed to say the word slavery to make the case for abolition from the stand of his own trial to being kicked out of Congress. At the end of that, they get rid of the gag rule. So you're allowed to say slavery, which opens up the debates that you're then allowed to have. So a year later, about a year or so later, he's given a speech on the Congress floor. I mean, it's amazing. This guy with this humility. He's given a speech on the Congress floor. He has a stroke in the middle of his speech. He dies right there. He doesn't die quite yet. They take him up to the upstairs room, keep him alive for another couple days. And eventually he dies up in that anteroom outside in the same Congress where he then devoted that later stage of his career. And they took volunteers for who's going to be the person who carries out his funeral rites and carries him out. And the guy who raises his hand and does it was a first-term congressman nobody had heard of, hadn't said a word, by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And so these are the stories of our history, man. We don't tell these stories anymore.
And
we celebrate, we put back our founding fathers and we talk about how these people are slave owners and we're going to dismiss the ideals they set into motion without recognizing that, like us today, these are imperfect human beings that still strived and to be the best that they possibly could have, just as we do today. And so it bothers me deeply for us to just lazily reject that, as opposed to saying we acknowledge those imperfections, but we're founded on the pursuit of a more perfect union.
Absolutely, but the reason
the pursuit of liberty, equality, and justice for all.
You can't just dismiss it and say, okay,
I'm not dismissing it, though. Do I sound like I'm dismissing it, Charlemagne?
Yes, but the reason
I disagree with you, man. And I
the
think
reason
that
you can't say
if you're going to put me in the
Jefferson,
category of the conversation we had and saying that I just dismissed it out of hand, I think that's unfair. I just think that's unfair. I don't think I dismiss it, but I acknowledge the totality of what a human being is, which is an imperfect and flawed human being who we can still celebrate.
I'm fine with that. But you can't.
That's what we have to be.
But you can't tell people just to ignore the fact that Thomas Jefferson.
I'm not telling people to ignore it, though. And this is what I think we.
All right, that's what we're gonna call. We're gonna call it a day right there. But and the thing that I like about the story, right? I didn't know that story. I don't know about you. Maybe you know more about history than me. But the thing that I like about that story is it shows that, number one, it wasn't the thought of everybody of that time, right? It proves the point that, those people, just like us, there's some of us on the wrong side of history right now. There's some of us on the right side of history right now. And the thing is true for them as well. But the one thing that we can grasp onto, because I'm not here to tell you to love the founding fathers. It's not the point of my video. I'm here to say that, like us, they too were flawed. Like us, there were some of them that were bold enough to speak against the tradition of the moment, and there were others that were not as bold to speak against the tradition of the moment because they understood they could get more accomplished by going along with the popular opinion. And so there were some that found it more, they found it more or better to agree with the popular opinion to move their agenda than to buck against the system and lose all that they possess. And for that, I'm not going to knock those individuals and say that they were wrong and we shouldn't believe anything they have to say otherwise. I'm going to knock those individuals and say they weren't bold enough to speak all of their truth. But the one thing you have to give to this country is there is a constitution that has been manipulated and changed over the years because of its original design to be able to be changed and manipulated by the people of the country at that time. And because of that, there are more opportunity within this country for more people who don't necessarily identify as being white than there are in other places. And so no matter what I think about the founding fathers of this country, they created a document that has been manipulated and changed so that the people who exist today, while it's not great in the sense that everything is clicking on all cylinders and everybody in the country feels equal. No, I understand that they don't. But I do understand that we've been manipulating and changing this thing throughout the years to make everybody feel more comfortable. And while there is certainly some other things that we can do, to say that what they did is trash and we should scrap it all and start from the beginning, simply because people that look like me weren't there in the 1700s to speak up. I don't know what we're going to do today that's going to be so much different than what they did in the 1700s? I just don't know. What are we going to do today that's going to be so much better? What are we going to create today that's going to be that much better? When today, I would even argue we have less camaraderie, less sense of togetherness than they probably did at the time. Because unlike us, at that time, they were fighting an institution that they were running from. They were fighting a system and running from a system that they didn't appreciate, because it was led with this idea of kingship and queenship, right? They were running from a system and trying to create something that was new and different and that they could control. And when they wanted to, as long as there was a provision, as long as they came together, that they could change this thing to be a whole nother thing, as long as enough of them agreed. When today we can't seem to agree on much, other than the fact that one side is completely racist and the other side is not great, but they're not as racist as the other side, so I'm gonna like them better. What is that? That's not even an argument for change. It's an argument for foolishness. And so once again, man, shout out to Vivek Ramaswamy. And the rest of this interview is really good too, so you should go check it out. But the one thing why, and the reason why I like this man, and why I wish we could have came to a conclusion that at least give this man more of an opportunity to compete across the country to see if he can become the nominee, but it's the sense of humility, the sense of openness, and willing to have the conversation, whatever the conversation is, that he's willing to do. That, to me, when I look at all the candidates that existed, that makes me at least want to give this man a shot. And he's not the only person I've seen this before. I've seen some other people who are willing to have these kind of conversations. And I think, this is what we need in this country to move forward. Are conversations about who we are, not as a country, but also who we are today and what we could be in the future if we can just keep having conversations with each other instead of standing on soapboxes and yelling and screaming about how bad you are. Because the truth is, most of us aren't as great as we think we are. We all have flaws, right? The one thing I love about the Bible is the Bible keeps us in perspective to who we are as it relates to God. God understands that we all have the ability to live completely in our flesh. And God understands that our flesh, if we allow it to lead us, is going to lead us down a path of destruction. And so the only real way to truly come into justice, righteousness, is to stop allowing our flesh to lead us and allow the word, the voice of God to lead us. And if we can ever get on one page where we can all be led by the voice of God and not our own personal opinions, because that's what they are, opinions, we'd be so much in a better place as individuals and as a country. And on that note, I'm out, man. I'm B. Period.